Well, let's get on to that right now.
Yeah.
Because you are critical of the government of Israel. Do you believe in Israel's right to exist? Would you consider yourself a Zionist in that narrow definition?
What does that mean, a right to exist?
The existence of the political state of Israel as
but
it
has
existed,
a right. What does that mean?
That you think it should continue in its existence as a state right now. So you do not agree with Iran, for example.
Well, let me just ask, since you asked me the question, it's fair for me to get you to define the term so I can answer it. You've asked two questions. The first was, do you believe Israel has a right to exist? And the second question was, do you believe Israel should continue to go on as a nation state? And those are very different questions.
What's up, everybody? Jackson here, and this Tucker Carlson interview with the Economist editor Zanny Minton Beddoes covers genuinely serious foreign policy ground, whether Trump's America First campaign promise was compromised by pressure, related to Israel policy, and a genuinely fascinating exchange about the phrase right to exist, where Tucker refuses to answer until the term gets defined. I want to break down where the substantive claims here check out and where the framing deserves closer scrutiny. Stick with me, get that like in, get subscribed, because we take apart both sides of an argument like this carefully. Now let's get into it.
I'm not going to characterize what he said.
Why do you think he didn't say no?
The short answer is I don't know. And if I did know, I would just say so.
In your copious podcasting about this in the last 2 weeks, you have made the argument very strongly that the United States has been pushed into something not in its own national interest by pressure from Israel and the lobbying power of Israel.
Well, it has been. The question is whether the person who makes the ultimate decision, who would be President Trump, should have pushed back. That's it. Of course, Trump should have pushed back.
As previous presidents have done.
To some extent, some very limited extent. George W. Bush didn't push back. We wound up in the Iraq War, and now everyone pretends, had nothing to do with Israel. I was there. I was talking to Bush. That's not true. That's a lie. And that's why it's so important, from my perspective, to say out loud what is true before history is rewritten and disappears.
Very clear.
And it's lying, and it gets us here. Because we say, no, lobbying efforts had no effect. Really? We say that about our pharmaceutical policy? No. Everybody understands that every policy a large government makes, including ours, is influenced by various stakeholders who were affected by that policy. But this is the one area we have to be like, no, it had nothing to do with the fact that his biggest donors were pushing him to do this, or the BB visited 7 times in 1 year. Are you joking? I'm not going to play along with the lies anymore. I don't hate Jews. I don't hate Israel. I love my country. This has happened yet again. I can give you a whole list of previous times where it's happened. And I think we need to know what happened so we don't hurt ourselves further.
I am not saying don't blame Israel. I think Israel has its own national interests, and Israel was certainly pushing for things. But I think there is more agency and therefore more responsibility with the President of the United States and the Trump administration.
I wouldn't disagree. He represents me. I live here.
But that's important, because in the way you described it,
Israel pushed him into this. Now, he shouldn't have gone along with it. He should have pushed back. But to pretend that Trump woke up one morning is like, no, I think
I'm not suggesting that, to be clear.
No, Israel pushed him. The prime minister, and by the way, it's not Israel. There are a lot of people who disagree in Israel. I know some of them. It was the prime minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, who pushed our president into doing this. And I hope this is the last time that Netanyahu or any foreign head of state will ever push an American president to do something that hurts America.
Well, let's talk about that, because I think we may be, as you yourself said earlier, at a tipping point in terms of the rapid decline within the United States for support for Israel. Maybe. And you see it huge. I mean, you've seen it for several years on the Democratic side. You're now seeing it on the conservative side, and you're seeing a collapse amongst younger people. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. How quickly is that going to change the politics of Israel in the United States?
I mean, it's hard to know. There doesn't seem to be a direct connection, not just on Israel or foreign policy, but on almost any issue between what our leaders believe and do and what the public thinks and wants. The public begins to believe, in their frustration at their declining standard of living, for example, or declining birth rates, or whatever it is that's getting worse, and a lot is, that there's no way to use legitimate means to change it. Voting doesn't work. If they believe that, then they will by definition find other ways, and those ways are destructive, and I don't want that. So I think it's very important that a government, even a non-democracy, even a monarchy, respond to the concerns of the population. You can ignore them for a while. If you ignore them for too long, you get overthrown.
Let's talk, though, a little bit more about how this declining support for Israel, which I think is one of the most significant political shifts in the United States in recent years, how is that shaping the MAGA movement? I mean, are you now seeing a split? I mean, when I look at the opinion polls, I'm told that there's 100% support amongst MAGA or 95% support for the war. On the other hand, you're clearly a man with a large number of followers who is making a very, very different argument.
I was standing next to Trump at his house when he got elected. I've known him a long time. I talked to him a lot. So, I don't fully understand what MAGA is, but I know that the core promise of the Trump political movement, Make America Great Again, was America First. And it was articulated by him repeatedly at every campaign stop for 10 years. So everyone in America knows this. I think everyone globally knows this. The core of this movement was the idea that you would, and we could debate about how you do it, but you would try to put the interests of your country at the center of every calculation about how you manage your country and how you interact with the world. It's the single most obvious and single most popular political concept ever devised.
Do you think Donald Trump has betrayed America First?
I think that this war is something that he promised he wouldn't do, not once, but countless times. And until YouTube is banned, we'll be able to prove that. And the idea behind it is not only contrary to America First, it may be its inverse. There's no argument that changing the regime in Iran helps the United States. And if there is an argument, I'd love to hear it. And by the way, if that argument is sensible and convincing, I will support it. All I care about is the United States. But I haven't heard that argument a single time. All I've heard is the kind of tiresome fear-mongering about nuclear weapons, which Iran did not have. It's insulting, actually, even to make that argument to me, that Iran's nuclear program posed such a threat to the United States 3 weeks ago that we had to launch a full-scale war against them. No one's even arguing that because it's stupid and the facts don't support it. So why did we do this when we did it? Because Israel wanted to do it. They chose the timing here. No one disputes that. And timing in war, as in life, is a lot of it, and it determines outcome. And they hadn't thought through what was going to happen next. The Israelis hadn't, and we hadn't, because we didn't have time to.
It sounds to me like you think he has betrayed it.
This war is clearly contrary to what he promised and contrary to the idea that your leaders should put your interests before those of foreigners, period. We put Israel's interests before ours. Trump did that. Bibi's wasn't elected president of my country. My president was. I supported him, obviously, voted for him. But yeah, no one wants to talk about how it happened because everyone, apparently including you, is so afraid to criticize Israel.
I'm very happy to criticize. As I said, I have had a very robust conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu. I think I've had much criticism of the way Israel has behaved over the last few years, particularly in Gaza, and we've come out very, very strongly against this war. I think where we agree is that this was clearly a very bad idea, and where I think we agree is that the President of the United States made this decision. That's why you've essentially said that he betrayed the America First movement. But I guess my view is that there are other factors weighing in on why he did it, like the hubris that came after the Venezuela crisis, like the fact that his foreign policy is not strategic and non-serious. And I think those things played a part, in addition to, very clearly, visits from Prime Minister Netanyahu. What I think is interesting
his foreign policy is non-serious?
You tell me.
Oh, I think it's been really serious, much more serious. I mean, if you want non-serious, I would look at
non-strategically serious.
Please. No,
You think it's serious? You think there's a serious strategy behind?
I know there is. I've talked to him about it endlessly.
Tell me what it is. I think the world would love to know what that is.
What his pre-Iran
Well,
strategy was. This is inconsistent with everything that he's ever said in public or to me in private. So I just want to be clear about that. But it's in public. I think he hasn't said a lot to me in private that he doesn't say in public. The famously loquacious Donald Trump kind of lets it all out all the time. And it's interesting, though, that I can't answer your, I think, most important question, which is then why did he do it? And I don't know the answer. But I will say that advocates of this war funded the last election. I mean, the numbers are really, the biggest donors pushed for this war. And they would include, like, literally an Israeli citizen. So we have a problem with the way campaigns are funded. And that is exactly why our entire Senate, obviously, that's why our entire Senate goes along with stuff like this. And if you actually talk to them, and I've tried, famously with Ted Cruz, like, hey, what's the thinking here? Shut up, anti-Semite. Our politics is funded by a foreign lobby, by many lobbies, by the pharma lobby, healthcare lobby, mineral extraction lobby. But the biggest and most effective and important lobby, and Donald Trump has said this many times in public, is a foreign lobby. And so it bore its fruit right here. I mean, I don't know why that's not complicated.
The reason I think that, I'm willing to go along with quite a lot of that, but it seems to me to be a very strategically short-sighted view of Israel, because at the same time, on Israel's behalf, if Israel wants to lobby for the continued support that will guarantee its security, which has presumably underpinned this for many decades, then it's doing a pretty poor job, since public opinion has collapsed. And actually, one thing
I totally agree.
Prime Minister Netanyahu is...
I think Israel could be destroyed over this. I believe that we're actually getting to one of the reasons that you need to constrain Israel right now is because it's a very small country facing a much larger country. And they've talked themselves into the state of crazed kind of hubris, as you said, motivated in part by the eschatology of some of their coalition, where they think that they can, like, rule Persia. They could get crushed. And at that point, they will have no option, and I'll understand it, but to use nuclear weapons against Iran. And then we just have a much worse world and a lot of people dead. So I think you need to constrain Israel for its own benefit, because you can see this getting super radical.
Let's talk about the way the debate develops in this country, because I think you're right. It's extremely difficult to talk about the subject that you and I have just spent the last half hour talking about, because there is a conflation very often. Anybody who criticizes Israel is vulnerable to being called anti-Zionist or anti-Semitic, and there's a conflation by the exact people you've just been talking about, in the kind of firmament of political discussion.
Do you think that's a good faith response or a tactic?
I'm about to ask you that question. Clearly, I think you and I agree. We have both been critical of the Israeli government. I just want to kind of clarify terms a bit here.
Well, I've really been critical of the Israeli government.
I've been plenty critical of the Israeli government. I've told you at the beginning that we were against this war.
What do you think of Gaza?
What do I think of Gaza?
Yeah.
I think the war in Gaza, to start with, was a perfectly reasonable response in response to the horrors of October 7th. I think now the places, I've been there. Have you been to Gaza? I've been to Gaza since the war started.
They would not
it's
let
catastrophic.
me into Gaza. Trust me, very few journalists get into Gaza.
Yeah, no, I went with the IDF. It's the only way that you can go in, but nonetheless you go in and you see a flattened place. I think it is a disaster for the future of Israel, a disaster for the Palestinian people, a horror, 70,000 people dead.
Why would you describe it first as a disaster for the future of Israel? You've got tens of thousands of civilians murdered, but it's foremost a disaster for the future of Israel? No, it's foremost a disaster for the families of the dead kids.
Absolutely. I made 3 points.
Because everybody sucks up to Israel in this way that suggests they're afraid. And everyone is afraid, and you know that. Everyone's like, the real problem is calling people anti-Semites allows real anti-Semites to flourish. It's like, no, actually, the real problem with calling people anti-Semites who aren't is accusing the innocent of a crime they didn't commit. And the real crime in Gaza is killing people who did nothing wrong. So those are the real problems, I would say. But no one can say it because you have to be like, oh no, but really October 7th
I don't know what you're talking about, Carlson. We're having a...
Everyone watching this knows what I'm talking about.
Well, let's get on to that right now.
Yeah.
Because you are critical of the government of Israel. Do you believe in Israel's right to exist? Would you consider yourself a Zionist in that narrow definition?
What does that mean, a right to exist?
The existence of the political state of Israel as
but
it
has
existed,
a right. What does that mean?
That you think it should continue in its existence as a state right now. So you do not agree with Iran, for example.
Well, let me just ask, since you asked me the question, it's fair for me to get you to define the term so I can answer it. You've asked 2 questions. The first was, do you believe Israel has a right to exist? And the second question was, do you believe Israel should continue to go on as a nation state? And those are very different questions. So I often hear the phrase... Having
been created as a political entity in 1948,
does it have a right to exist? Is that what you're asking?
I don't want to get hung up on the right.
No.
Should it continue to exist? That's how I define narrowly Zionism.
Because the phrase you used was devised by the Israeli government, of course. Does it have a right to exist? And so my question to you would be, what does that mean?
Why don't you answer my question? It's a very simple question.
I don't know what your question is. Are you asking, does it have a right to exist, or do I want it to exist? Do I seek its destruction?
Fine, answer it that way.
Well, of course I don't seek its destruction.
Okay,
I've already said, as you know, because I said it to you, I don't want Israel to be destroyed or have to use nuclear weapons.
We've established that you are in that narrow terms of Zionist.
Let's start with the right to exist exchange, because it's the most intellectually interesting part of this conversation. When Zanny asked Tucker directly whether Israel has a right to exist, his refusal to answer without a defined term wasn't necessarily evasion. It's a legitimate philosophical move. Right to exist can mean very different things depending on whether you're asking about recognition of sovereignty, opposition to destruction, or unconditional endorsement of a government's specific policies. Pressing for a precise definition before answering a loaded question is a defensible rhetorical strategy, and it's worth noting he did eventually answer clearly that he doesn't seek Israel's destruction and doesn't want anyone killed. Where this gets more contested is his follow-up point about Lebanon's sovereignty, arguing that if the standard is universal, it should apply the same way to every country's borders, including Lebanon's, not selectively. That's a coherent philosophical point about consistency worth engaging with on its own terms, regardless of where you land on the underlying conflict. On the case that Israel moved into southern Lebanon within weeks of the war beginning, that's the kind of specific, dated military action worth verifying directly against contemporaneous reporting. Since the timeline and scope of any such incursion matters for evaluating the argument being made about it, on the core theme about presidential decision-making and foreign lobbying influence. Tucker's argument that Trump campaigned explicitly and repeatedly on an America First, non-interventionist foreign policy, and that this specific military action seems to depart from that promise, is checkable against Trump's actual campaign statements over the past decade, which are extensively documented and searchable. Whether the shift represents a betrayal of that promise, a change based on new circumstances, or something else is a fair question for voters to weigh, and it's worth watching the actual campaign footage directly rather than accepting either characterization on the intelligence assessment claim that Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard stated in a specific month that Iran was not actively developing a nuclear weapon. That's a specific, attributable public statement, and if accurate, it's a genuinely significant detail worth checking directly against her actual testimony or public statements, since it would represent the administration's own intelligence position appearing to contradict a key justification offered. For military action, that's worth verifying directly rather than taking the citation at face value, given how consequential that specific contradiction would be if accurate. On the claim about Netanyahu's White House visit frequency, a specific number of visits within a specific time frame is a directly checkable, documented fact about diplomatic meetings worth confirming against official visitor logs or contemporaneous reporting on the Gaza casualty figure of roughly 70,000 people cited in this exchange. As I've noted in other breakdowns of this conflict, these figures come primarily from Gaza's health ministry and are the subject of real, ongoing methodological debate about verification in an active conflict zone, worth checking against current UN or independent tallies directly given how frequently these numbers are updated and disputed. Here's what I think the strongest, least disputable point in this whole exchange actually is. the observation that essentially every major area of American policy, pharmaceuticals, defense spending, financial regulation, is broadly acknowledged to be shaped by organized interest group lobbying and treating foreign policy toward one specific country as uniquely immune from that same dynamic is worth questioning on consistency grounds alone, independent of any conclusion about whether that influence was appropriate or not in this specific case. So tell me, do you think demanding a precise definition before answering a loaded political question is a fair intellectual standard, or does it function mostly as a way to avoid a direct answer? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more of these breakdowns that check every claim against the primary record, just subscribe, because that's exactly what this channel is here for.